Hi everyone, welcome to week 5. So first thing, I want to say thank you for the great brainstorming this week and the discussions. You guys came up with a bunch of awesome posts about getting started on your icon essay. Lots of people had some wonderful examples of clustering, where they started with an idea written in the center and they sort of branched out. Those were all really nice. Some people had some awesome examples of free writing. So great work on that. And I would encourage you all to make sure to do some sort of pre-writing for all of your future essays, in this class and other classes. It's always going to be helpful. Sometimes it may seem a little tedious, but in the long run, the more you do it, the easier it will become, and it will make your later writing much clearer and more organized. Another great point that people had about the brainstorming was that it can be useful for just figuring out what you want to write about. A lot of the difficulty people have described was figuring out which icon to choose. So you can use brainstorming to do that. Take 10 minutes and write out every icon you could potentially think of until you can't think of any more. That's a great way to use brainstorming. Also, great work on the other discussion about openers. Lots of people had some awesome points. It sounded like most of you were mostly interested in the front door approach. So Trimble in Writing with Style talks about a good way to start an essay is telling the reader exactly what it's about and what's most interesting about it. Something surprising, something fascinating in your first line or your first paragraph to hook the reader's attention. And that's a great way to do it. Most of you said that was sort of the style that you liked. You can also do the backdoor approach. That works just as well. Whatever you're most comfortable with. A lot of people had said they hadn't really worked on those sort of introductions, so hopefully the chapter will open up some ideas for how to do that in your essays. People had also made some great points about the doing research at the same time as doing sort of brainstorming and starting out, figuring out what they wanted to write about. I think that's a great idea. If you figured out an icon and you're trying to figure out, well, what attributes do they have, what values do they have, you may want to know where did they start? When did they become an icon? When did they become famous? If they're not a person, who were they created by? When did that get started? Why were they created? These are all questions you might ask. And you can figure those out in a quick Google search. You can figure those out searching them on Wikipedia, just to give you an orientation of where you're supposed to be going. You can't find all the answers on there, right? Because they're open to interpretation. So you have to do the work yourself to figure out what values they represent. But that can be a great place to start. So definitely encourage, when you're in the pre-writing stage, to do some quick research. And as we're going to see here in a minute, you'll put that to work in your introduction. Okay, so there's 2 assignments for this week. One, obviously, is the icon essay, which I'm going to talk about in detail here in a minute. The other one is the week 5 discussion. So in the week 5 discussion, you need to find an advertisement. It could be online, it could be in a magazine, it could be anywhere, and analyze what values it's using to sell its product and what part of it is false or unreal. How do we know, if we look at it carefully, that it's actually misrepresenting some part of reality in order to sell us something? How do we know that? I talked about this in an example in week 4 discussion, so you can take a look at the last part of that for an example on how to do that. But I'll go real briefly over what are some of our major values, how do we manipulate these in order to sell stuff. You can also look at the chapter 2 on deconstructing media in Mirror on America for examples of how to do this. They give a whole list of questions on asking things about an image to figure out what it means and what values it represents. So, if you look in your modules section, you'll find both of those assignments in there. So here's the week 5 discussion. So the discussion asks, explain what mythology, what values the advertisement is using to sell its product. So in the discussion, find a piece of advertisement, post a photo of it, and then tell us what values it's using to sell what's in it. What popular mythology is it using to sell? And then also look at the image very carefully and analyze, are there parts of it that don't seem real? Are there parts of it that don't match reality and they're covering up some issue? If you look at page 29 and 30, they give examples of this. So they talk about an imaginary advertisement. They talk about this advertisement where there's a beautiful woman on a beach and there's a wealthy man next to her. And the beach is white and clear and it's private and the sparkling blue water is cool and clear. And there's a car in the background, a luxury car. We can immediately start to figure out what this advertisement is saying. It's saying, well, if you buy this type of car, you are going to be beautiful and wealthy and famous. That it's going to change your life in that sort of way. Going back to those three big values that I talked about in the last lecture, it mostly is focused on number 2, the money, prosperity, the American dream. So we've got 3 major values here. We've got freedom, money, prosperity, the American dream, and rebellion. We have other values, obviously, that connect to our history, but those are the 3 big ones. This advertisement that they're using at the beginning of the chapter is selling us a product via the American dream. It's saying, this is one of our values, you love it, go and buy this car. The things about it that are false, that the book points out, is the woman is sitting, in a bikini, some sort of bathing suit, and she's very pale, and she's sitting in the bright sun, and she doesn't seem to be getting sunburned at all. Or, for example, the car is perfectly parked on this beach, but it's not the type of car that you would drive on a beach. It's not like a dune buggy. It's this, luxury car. Why? How did it get there? It's not usually easy to drive a luxury car with the wrong type of tires on a beach. Or why is the man dressed in a suit not sweating profusely? Why isn't he really hot? Well, it's because it's false. It's an advertisement, obviously. But those are the kind of things you only notice if you really are analyzing the image. If you're breaking it down, looking at what's the background like, what is the environment like, who is being depicted in the photo, looking at all those sort of things will help you analyze an image. So do the best you can on the discussion. What a advertisement means, what it's trying to do to sell you something. It's not easy to figure out if you haven't done it before. It takes practice. But once you get in the habit, you can look at anything and analyze, okay, what values is it using to sell something? What mythology is it creating? And what's false about it? So there's always something to figure out there. So that's the discussion for week 5. If you get stuck on it, please reach out, please contact me. Reread the chapter on deconstructing media, and watch the example I do in the week 4 lecture, where I take a picture and I analyze it for what its values are and what falseness is in it. So there's the week 5 discussion. After that, we have the big one, the first essay for the class, the icon essay. Something to keep in mind, it's important to do all the discussions, it's important to do all the work in this class, but be aware that the essays are worth much more points. So the icon essay is worth 100 points. That's as much as all the discussions you've done for the rest of the class. So make sure to give yourself enough time to complete it. It should turn out to be 2 or 3 pages, 2 pages at a minimum. Make sure you have time to do a draft and revise that draft. I can't emphasize enough giving yourself a night to not work on it. So, trying to get a draft done by Friday, say, so that you can not look at it on Saturday, do some other homework, and then revise it on Sunday. Also, once you have a draft, read it out loud. I tell students this again and again and again. If you have a quiet space, you've got a room to yourself, read it out loud all the way through. It will help you catch more grammar and problematic sentence structure errors than anything else. You don't have to know English grammar that well. If you read a text out loud, you'll figure out where you're missing commas, where there's run-on sentences. all those sort of things will come out. So when you're doing editing, read the essay out loud. I'm going to go through this sort of step by step so that you guys have a good idea of how to do this. First things first, how do you do an introduction? How do you write an introduction for an essay like this? Now, one, you can try and come up with the catchiest introduction possible, right? It could be something surprising, it could be something interesting, a surprising statistic or fact, but it doesn't have to be. That's not where you have to put all your energy. It's really about answering some basic questions. Let me line out what those are for your introduction. So for the icon essay, you want to answer these questions when you're writing your introduction. So first, what is it? And keep in mind that you're writing about an icon, right? So we should all know who it is. But you've got to tell us the basic background information as if we don't know who it is. So if you're writing about some famous movie star, tell us why they're famous. Tell us what they're known for. Tell us how they got their start. You might start your paper with what we usually think of when we think of that icon. What do you think of when you think of, Beyonce? Somebody was writing about Marilyn Monroe, Johnny Cash, Bruce Lee. What immediately pops into your head when you think of this? That's a good way to start. So, what is it? You could also, I guess, say that as, who is it? So answer that question. Could take you a sentence, could take you 2 or 3. The next one is, when, how did this start? So where did they come from? Where were they born? What did they do before they were famous? How did they get famous? What was their breakthrough role? What are they most known for? When did they become an icon? What were the events that caused them to reach this icon status? Third question. Why is it an icon? Again, this seems like a really sort of silly question. Because you might say, well, obviously, Kurt Cobain is an icon. Like, obviously Frank Sinatra is an icon. Whoever. You don't have to explain why. But in this essay, we want to formally lay that information out. So, how do you know that they're well known? Is their face recognizable? Were their songs pop hits? Were their movies super popular? Is there a statistic citing how many people know who they are? Here's an example of this in the essay that I wrote on Smokey the Bear. Now, you don't have to have a statistic necessarily, but you could potentially put one in there. I found a statistic saying that by 2010, Smokey the Bear had become a popular icon recognized by 95% of American adults and 77% of children. That's a pretty strong statistic indicating that Smokey the Bear is an icon. He's a popular icon because everybody knows who he is, right? So explain why they're an icon. So that's your introduction. If you can answer these questions, each one of these might take 2 or 3 sentences, might take 1, might take 3, just depends on your writing style and your icon. That's your intro. Okay, the next part is the thesis statement. This is going to be a single sentence that's going to come at the end of your introduction. So you're going to have your intro paragraph, and the last line of it is going to be your thesis. Your thesis statement should be, what are the 3 values they represent? What do you think are the top 3? Do they somehow correspond to the big three that we talked about last week? Do somehow they represent artistic freedom or equality? Do they represent money and prosperity? Do they represent rebellion in some sort of way? Or do they represent something else? Do they represent intelligence, maybe, or sexuality, or some sort of negative? Maybe if you're talking about like a mobster, right? If we were talking about John Gotti or something, maybe they represent criminality. We could argue that that's an American value as well. So whatever you think the top three are, it doesn't matter what you pick. As long as you put in a statement, they represent this value, and this value, because of this reason, and this reason. So what are those reasons? That's the next part. In the thesis, you don't have to tell me why you believe that. All you have to do is state it. So if you look at the example of Smokey the Bear, I say, Smokey the Bear is an American icon that represents three values: conservation of forests and the environment, protection of America, and respect for authorities. That's it. I don't say why. You don't have to say why in the thesis statement. The why gets explained in the body paragraphs. Your body paragraphs are the three paragraphs after your intro and your thesis. So your intro and your thesis statement will be one paragraph. They might end up maybe about half a page, like this one. It could be a little bit longer, maybe shorter, but probably about half a page is a good size. Probably 5 to 9 sentences, something like that. After that, you're going to organize your body paragraphs around your three values. So in your thesis statement, you're going to say they represent value 1, value 2, value 3. You're going to organize the essay so that the body paragraphs correspond. So in your body paragraph, you're going to explain why they represent value 1. That's going to be your first body paragraph. And it's going to start with a topic sentence. Topic sentence explains how or why something does something. Okay? It provides a reason why you believe they represent whatever value. So in my example essay, I just listed the topic sentences. So take a look at topic sentence 2. Smokey represents the national security imperatives of preventing forest fires, which can weaken the U.S. economy, take American lives, and support foreign enemies. Now, I don't have evidence to back this up. But that's not what a topic sentence is about. A topic sentence is just saying what you're arguing. It's very clear what your argument is. And it answers how or why. So you don't want a topic sentence to be a question. You don't want a topic sentence to be a statement of fact. It needs to be argumentative. Now, if I develop the rest of that body paragraph, I would have to find explanations of why I think Smokey represents national security imperatives. And probably I would find that by looking at images of him. He's depicted as, protecting the forests, protecting the U.S. And he's also, because of his origins, depicted as preventing forest fires so that the U.S. can win World War II. So that's what I would explain to back up that topic sentence. So there's all that information. Intro, those 3 questions, thesis statement, body paragraphs connecting to the 3 parts of your thesis statement. We'll talk about a couple other things. Keep in mind, when you're writing this, that writing is a messy process. Nobody writes perfectly organized essays from beginning to end. So if you're having trouble, what I usually do when I'm trying to figure out what my argument is, what my thesis statement is to start with that. Don't worry about the introduction. Don't worry about the body paragraphs. Just tell me straight out, what do you think they represent? If you're talking about what does Muhammad Ali represent? What does Jimi Hendrix represent? What does Madonna represent? Tell me the first 3 biggest things that come to mind. And then figure out afterwards how do you prove that. Okay? That's usually where I would start. So try to start with a thesis statement. Muhammad Ali represents this, this, and this. Madonna represents these values, this value, and this value. Once you've got a thesis statement, then you can go back in and build an introduction. You can find information to back up what's in your body paragraphs. So, intro, thesis, body 1 with value 1. Body 2 with value 2. Body 3 with value 3. And then conclusion. So if each of these is a paragraph, 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 paragraph. It's the classic 5-paragraph essay, which means it should end up at about 2.5 pages. Each of these paragraphs should be about half a page long. Again, they could be shorter, they could be longer, they're paragraphs, they're flexible. If you have a hard time developing the full 2.5 pages, you may not be delving enough into the values. So this essay shouldn't be about that much information about them. I don't need that much background information. I want your interpretation of what you think, what values they think they represent, and why. So this essay is all about telling me why you believe this, and